Hello, sweetheart. Come in, come in. Don't mind the cold. I've been keeping the house a little chilly these days. Old habits, I suppose. You know, people my age are supposed to spend our winters indoors. Safe, warm, wrapped in blankets, with a nice hot cup of tea. And most days, that's exactly what I do. But it wasn't always like that. There was a time when winter called to me. When the moment I saw fresh snow, I'd lace up my boots and disappear into the wilderness for days. Back then, I was a real adrenaline chaser. I spent more nights than I can count in frozen forests. 50 years of winter camping teaches you a lot. About nature, about survival, and about yourself. But it also teaches you about the other things that live out there in the cold and the dark. The things you won't find in any field guide or survival manual. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 3 stories. 3 true stories from my years of winter camping. Stories I've kept quiet for decades. Because really, who would believe an old woman talking about strange sounds in the middle of the night? But I'm 91 now, and I think it's time. Time to tell you what truly happens when the temperature drops, the sun disappears, and you find yourself completely alone in the wilderness. So sit down, get comfortable, and listen closely, because these aren't fairy tales. They're not campfire stories meant to give you a little thrill. These are warnings, and I hope you never find yourself needing them. And if you're brave enough to hear all 3 stories, well, you might want to subscribe. I wouldn't want you to wander off and miss what comes next. You know, the kids always ask me why I don't go camping anymore. Why I sold all my winter gear, my snowshoes, even the insulated tent that kept me warm for 30 winters. They think I'm just too old now, that my bones can't handle the cold the way they used to. But that's not the reason. Not even close. Everything changed during my last winter camping trip, back in January of 1987. I was 54 then, still strong, still adventurous. And that winter, I learned something I wish I never had. Some places aren't meant for us. Some places belong to things that were there long before we ever came. I used to go winter camping every year. It was my tradition, my escape from the pressures of life. While everyone else hid inside their warm homes, I'd pack my gear and head into the White Mountains of New Hampshire. There was something in the silence of the winter forest that spoke to my soul. No buzzing insects, no chirping birds. Just the whisper of wind through frozen branches and the crunch of snow under your boots. Pure, untouched, almost sacred. That January, I decided to try a new route. I'd been camping in the same areas for decades and wanted something different, something more challenging. On the map, I found an old forest road leading into a valley I had never explored. The weather forecast was terrible. Nighttime temperatures dropping to 15 below. But I'd survived worse. I had my 4-season tent, my -20 sleeping bag, my propane heater. I was an experienced camper. I knew exactly what I was doing. Or at least, I thought I did. The hike was beautiful. Fresh snow had fallen the night before, and everything looked like it came straight out of a postcard. The endless white hills, the dusted pine trees, the kind of landscape that makes you believe in something bigger than yourself. Around noon, I parked at the trailhead, slung my pack over my shoulder, and started walking. The trail was barely visible under all that snow, but I had my map and my compass. I wasn't worried. 3 miles in, I found the perfect spot. A small clearing surrounded by thick pine with a rocky outcrop on one side, creating a natural windbreak. The snow was about 2 feet deep, so it took me nearly an hour to pack down a platform for my tent and dig a proper fire pit. By the time I finished, the sun was already sinking behind the ridge. Winter days up there are short. You learn to work fast. I got a fire going, melted some snow for water, and made myself a simple dinner. If I remember right, it was freeze-dried beef stew. Not gourmet, but it was hot and filling. As I sat by the flames, watching the sky shift from pink to purple to black, that familiar peace settled over me. This was why I came out here. The silence, the solitude, just me and the wilderness. But then I noticed something strange. Pay close attention here. What would you have done in my place? Share your thoughts in the comments. The silence was too complete. Winter forests are quiet, yes, but there's always something. Wind in the trees, snow falling off branches, a distant owl. But this was absolute silence, like the whole world had stopped breathing. I'd been camping long enough to know that animals go quiet when a predator is near. My hand went instinctively to the bear spray on my belt. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, moving the beam back and forth across the darkness. Nothing. Just trees, snow, and shadows. I told myself I was being paranoid. There were no bears this time of year. They were all hibernating. Deer could be dangerous, but they always made plenty of noise. Most likely, I was just spooked from being in an unfamiliar area. That's when I heard it. Footsteps in the snow. Not the four-legged padding of an animal. 2 legs. Human footsteps. Slow and deliberate, crunching through the snow in a steady rhythm. I froze, my heart suddenly hammering in my chest. Who the hell would be out here at this time of night? In this cold? The footsteps circled my tent. I could track them by sound, moving from my left to my right, around the back, coming up on the left again. A complete circle. Then they stopped, right at the front of my tent. I could see a shadow through the fabric, backlit by the dim glow of the moon. Someone was standing there, just standing, not moving, not speaking. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you?" No response. The shadow didn't move. "I'm armed," I lied. I wasn't. I'd never felt the need to bring a gun camping. "You need to identify yourself." Still nothing. Just that shadow, perfectly still, like a statue. My mouth went dry. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. Even if it was another camper, even if they were lost or in trouble, they would say something. They would respond. I watched that shadow for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. My heater was running, but I suddenly felt cold. Not the cold of winter, but something deeper, something that came from inside. And then, slowly, the shadow moved. Not away, closer. It leaned forward, and I could see the outline of a head pressing against the fabric of my tent, distorting it inward. I scrambled backward in my sleeping bag, pressing myself against the far wall of the tent. "Get away from me!" I screamed. My voice cracked. I didn't care. Terror does that to you. The shadow pulled back. I heard those footsteps again, moving away from my tent, back into the forest. I listened as they faded into the distance, growing fainter and fainter until they were gone. But I didn't relax. I couldn't. I sat there in my sleeping bag, my propane heater hissing softly, watching the front of my tent for any sign of movement. I don't think I slept at all that night. Every tiny sound made me jump. The tent fabric rustling in a breeze, a branch cracking under the weight of snow, my own breathing, too loud in the confined space. When the first gray light of dawn finally started filtering through the tent walls, I've never been so relieved in my life. I unzipped my tent slowly, half expecting to see someone standing there waiting for me. But the clearing was empty. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, covering everything in a clean white blanket. I should have felt safe. It should have looked peaceful. But my eyes went immediately to the snow around my tent. And that's when my blood turned to ice. Footprints, dozens of them, all around my tent in perfect circles. Not one circle, not two, dozens. Like someone had spent the entire night walking around and around and around my tent. The prints were deep, clear, unmistakable. And they were wrong. They were bare footprints, human feet, no boots, no shoes, nothing. Just bare feet in snow that was 15 degrees below zero. I stood there staring at those prints, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. No one could walk barefoot in this cold. No one. Your feet would be frostbitten in minutes. You'd lose your toes. You'd lose your feet. It was impossible, but the prints were right there in front of me. I knelt down to examine one more closely. The toes were spread wide, the heel deep. Whoever or whatever made these prints had been carrying weight. And the strangest thing, there was no trail leading into or out of the clearing. The footprints just started at the edge of the tree line, circled my tent countless times, and ended at the same spot where they began. Like whoever made them had appeared out of nowhere, circled me all night, and vanished back into nothing. I didn't waste any time. I packed up my gear faster than I'd ever packed in my life, not even bothering to make coffee or eat breakfast. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the clips and zippers. I kept glancing over my shoulder at the tree line, expecting to see someone standing there watching me. But there was nothing, just trees and snow and that horrible, oppressive silence. As I was shoving the last of my gear into my pack, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. There was a tree at the edge of the clearing, a tall white pine, and someone had carved something into the bark. I walked over to get a closer look, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave. It was a warning, carved deep into the wood, the letters rough but deliberate. Leave before dark. My stomach dropped. This had been here before I arrived. Someone had carved this, maybe years ago, maybe decades. A warning that I'd missed in my excitement to set up camp. A warning I should have heeded. I turned to leave, to get the hell out of that valley as fast as I could. But something caught my eye. There was another tree about 20 feet away, with something hanging from one of its lower branches. I don't know why I walked over to look. Curiosity? Morbid fascination? The same impulse that makes you look at a car accident even though you know you shouldn't. It was a boot, an old, rotted hiking boot, hanging from a piece of frayed rope, and inside the boot, still laced up tight, was a foot, or what was left of one, frozen solid, mummified by the cold, blackened with frostbite. The toes were gone, just stumps where they used to be. I vomited right there in the snow. I couldn't help it. My body just rejected what I was seeing. When I was done dry heaving, I grabbed my pack and ran. I didn't care about following the trail or being careful. I just ran, crashing through the snow, branches whipping at my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I don't remember much about that hike out. It's all a blur of white and panic and the overwhelming need to get away. I know I fell several times. I know I lost my hat somewhere and didn't go back for it. I know that I kept hearing footsteps behind me, matching my pace. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled with my keys so badly I dropped them in the snow. I was crying. I didn't even realize it until I tasted salt on my lips. I got the door open, threw my gear in the back, and drove away from that place as fast as the snowy roads would allow. I went straight to the local ranger station. I told them everything. About the footprints, about the boot with the foot still in it, about the carved warning. The ranger, a young guy in his 20s, listened with a skeptical expression that grew more pronounced as I talked. When I finished, he just nodded slowly, "Ma'am," he said, and I could hear the condescension in his voice. "Winter camping can be disorienting. The isolation, the cold, the darkness. People see things, hear things. It's not uncommon." "I know what I saw," I told him. "There are footprints. Bare footprints in the snow, and there's a foot in a boot hanging from a tree." He sighed. "I'll file a report. We'll send someone to check it out when the weather clears." But I could tell he didn't believe me. He thought I was a crazy old woman who'd let her imagination run wild. Maybe he thought I'd had some kind of breakdown out there. I didn't care. I'd done my duty. I'd reported it. What they did with that information was up to them. I never heard back from them. I don't know if they ever sent anyone to investigate. I don't know if they found the boot or the footprints or the warning carved into the tree. And honestly, I don't want to know. What I do know is this. I sold all my camping gear a month later. Every bit of it. The tent, the sleeping bag, the propane heater, the snowshoes, everything. I couldn't even look at it without feeling that cold dread creeping up my spine. I never went winter camping again. Never even went hiking in the winter. Some people think I'm being ridiculous. They say I let one bad experience ruin something I loved. But they weren't there. They didn't see those footprints circling endlessly in the snow. They didn't see that foot frozen and abandoned, left as a marker or a trophy or a warning. They didn't feel what I felt that night, that primal certainty that I was being hunted by something that wasn't human, something that walked barefoot through deadly cold and felt nothing. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about those footprints, about how they started and ended at the same spot, like whoever made them just materialized out of thin air. I think about that carved warning, "Leave before dark." I wonder how many people have seen that warning, how many ignored it like I did, and how many of them made it out. I think about the silence, too. That absolute, suffocating silence that pressed down on everything. Like the forest itself was afraid, like it knew something was wrong and was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. And I think about the shadow that pressed against my tent, the shape of a head pushing the fabric inward, trying to get closer to me. What was it looking for? What did it want? Was it curious? Hungry? Something else entirely? I'll never know. And I'm grateful for that. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Because the truth, whatever it is, would be worse than anything I could imagine. My grandchildren ask me to tell them camping stories sometimes. They want to hear about the moose I saw, the northern lights, the time I got snowed in for an extra 3 days and had to ration my food. I tell them those stories, the good ones, the safe ones. But I'll never tell them about my last winter camping trip, about the frozen watcher who circled my tent all night on bare feet. About the warning I didn't see until it was too late. About the boot hanging from the tree with its gruesome contents still inside. Some stories aren't meant for children. Hell, some stories aren't meant for anyone, but they stay with you anyway, whether you want them to or not. They become part of you. And late at night, when the wind howls and the house creaks, I remember that silence, that terrible, complete silence. And I wonder if it's still out there, waiting in that valley, walking circles in the snow, on bare feet that feel no cold, watching, always watching, waiting for the next person who ignores the warning carved into the tree. Now, the first story I told you was about something that happened in the woods, about something that hunted. But this second story, this one is different. This story is about what happens when you find yourself a place to shelter for the winter, and that shelter isn't as empty as it seems. This happened in February of 1991, when I was 58 years old. That was the year I had started ice fishing, mostly because my late husband Earl had loved it so dearly, and after he passed, I wanted to feel close to him in any way I could. Doing the things he loved made me feel like he was still with me somehow. If you've ever done something just to feel close to someone you lost, you're not alone. Share your story if you want. I went up to northern Minnesota, to a lake Earl and I used to visit often. Lake Vermilion, a beautiful place, even in the dead of winter. The ice fishing community up there is tight-knit and surprisingly welcoming. They had built a little village of ice shacks and cabins right on the frozen lake, and I rented one for the weekend. A cozy little shack, nothing fancy, just 4 walls, a hole in the ice, and a propane heater to keep you from freezing to death. The first day went well. I caught a few perch, nothing impressive, but I wasn't really there for the fish. I was there for the quiet, for the peace, for the memory of Earl sitting next to me, baiting my line with those rough hands when I couldn't get it right. His deep laughter echoing across the ice. Late in the afternoon, the temperature started to drop fast. The forecast said it would hit 30 below that night, which is brutal even for Minnesota. Most of the other fishermen packed up and headed to the main lodge on shore. They had heat, company, hot coffee. But I had paid for my little shack for the whole weekend, and I was stubborn. I had my -40 rated sleeping bag, my heater, plenty of propane. Everything would be fine, or so I thought. As the sun went down, the ice began to make those sounds it makes when it gets truly cold. Deep groans and cracks, like the lake itself was complaining about the temperature. I'd heard it before. It was normal. The ice was 3 feet thick. There was no danger of falling through. But there's something unsettling about those noises when you're alone on a frozen lake, in a tiny shack surrounded by miles and miles of nothing. I made myself dinner on my little camp stove, crawled into my sleeping bag, and tried to read by lantern light. But I couldn't focus. The shack felt smaller somehow, tighter. And between the creaks of the ice, it was too quiet, far too quiet. I kept feeling like I should be hearing something. Wind, loose snow hitting the walls, anything. But there was nothing. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside on the ice, the crunch of heavy boots on the snow that had gathered on the surface. I figured it was another fisherman checking his lines or heading to the toilets near the shore. I didn't think much of it. The footsteps passed right by my shack, close enough that I could hear each step clearly. Then they stopped, right in front of my door. I waited for a knock. Maybe someone needed help or wanted to borrow something. But there was no knock, just silence, and the unmistakable feeling that someone was standing there only a few inches away, separated from me by nothing but a thin wooden door. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I listened carefully, trying to catch any small movement, any sign of what this person wanted. And that's when I heard it. Breathing, slow, deep breathing, not strained or struggling, just steady, in and out, as if whoever was out there was listening to me, just as carefully as I was listening to them. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Can I help you?" I asked, louder this time. Still no response, just that breathing. And then, slowly, the door handle began to turn. I hadn't locked it. Why would I? We were in the middle of a lake, surrounded by fishermen. There was no reason to lock anything. But now, watching that handle turn, I realized my mistake. The door creaked open, and I braced myself to see someone standing there. Another fisherman, maybe. Someone lost, confused, or drunk. But there was no one. Just an empty darkness where the door had been, and beyond that, the endless, frozen lake under a moonless sky. I stared at that open doorway, my heart pounding. My breath stopped. Everything stopped. And then I saw them, footprints in the snow leading right up to my door. Fresh prints, but they didn't lead away. The moment the door opened, they just ended, as if whoever made them had simply vanished into thin air. I burst out of my sleeping bag, grabbed my flashlight, and aimed it into the darkness. The beam cut through the night, illuminating the ice and snow around my shack. Nothing, no one, just those footprints ending at my door. I told myself my mind was playing tricks on me, but the fear had sunk deep into my bones. I kept the fire blazing all night, throwing on log after log, even though I knew I was burning through my wood too fast. There was something in that silence that made me want light, heat, anything to push the darkness back. Around 11, I finally forced myself to let the fire die down and crawled into my cot. I turned on my little propane heater, got into my sleeping bag, and tried to settle in for the night. I slammed the door shut and locked it this time, my hands shaking. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the wind had blown it open. Maybe I hadn't closed it properly. Maybe the footprints were old, from earlier in the day. But I knew none of that was true. I'd heard the breathing. I'd watched the handle turn. Someone or something had opened my door. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my sleeping bag, flashlight in one hand, my fishing knife in the other, watching that door, waiting. Around 3 a.m, I heard it again. Footsteps, multiple sets this time, walking around my shack in slow, deliberate circles. I counted at least 3 different rhythms, 3 different gates. They circled and circled, never speaking, never stopping. And then they started knocking, not on the door, on the walls, all around the shack, rhythmic knocking, like they were testing the structure, looking for a weak point. I pressed myself into the corner, as far from the walls as I could get, knife gripped so tight, my knuckles were white. "Get away from here!" I screamed. "Leave me alone!" The knocking stopped. Everything went silent again. And then I heard a voice, a man's voice, rough and low, barely above a whisper. "Let us in, Margaret." My blood turned to ice. How did they know my name? How? "We're so cold, Margaret. Let us in." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had closed up with fear, because that voice, I recognized it. It was Earl. It was my dead husband's voice. "Margaret, please. I'm cold." Tears started streaming down my face. It sounded exactly like him. Exactly. Every inflection, every tone. It was impossible, but it was him. "You're not real," I whispered. "Earl is dead." "I know I am, sweetheart, but I'm still cold. So cold. Let me in, just for a little while." I wanted to. God help me. I wanted to open that door so badly, to see him again, to feel his arms around me. But something stopped me. Some deep instinct that screamed this was wrong. This was a trick. A trap. "No," I said, my voice stronger. "You're not Earl. Earl would never ask me to do something dangerous." The voice outside changed. The gentle tone vanished, replaced by something harsh and angry. "Let us in, old woman." More voices joined in, all demanding entry. Some sounded like people I knew. My mother, my sister who died in childbirth, Earl. Others were strangers. They all demanded. They all insisted. They all promised. They just wanted warmth. Just wanted shelter. Just wanted in. I covered my ears and screamed until they stopped. When I finally lowered my hands, there was silence again, complete Total silence. Not even the ice was groaning anymore. I waited until dawn, every muscle in my body tensed, expecting another attack. But nothing came. As the first gray light started filtering through the small window, I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. When the sun was fully up, I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The ice around my shack was covered in footprints, dozens of them, all different sizes. They formed a perfect circle around my shelter, trampled and overlapping from hours of walking. But like before, there were no trails leading to or from the circle. The prints just appeared and disappeared. I packed my gear in under 5 minutes and dragged it across the ice to shore. I didn't care about my deposit. I didn't care about anything except getting off that lake. When I reached the lodge, the owner asked if everything was okay. I must have looked terrible because his face went pale when he saw me. I told him what happened. He went very quiet. Then he told me something I'll never forget. 7 years ago, 3 ice fishermen had gone out on the lake during a cold snap. 50 below. Their shack was in almost the exact spot where mine had been. When other fishermen went to check on them the next morning, they found the 3 of them frozen solid inside. Their heater had malfunctioned. They died from hypothermia. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. The shack door was found wide open, like they'd opened it themselves in the final stages of hypothermia, when your body tricks you into thinking you're burning up. And around the shack, in the snow, were footprints, lots of them, circling, leading nowhere. Since then, every winter, fishermen report the same thing. Footsteps in the night, voices of loved ones begging to be let in, doors opening by themselves. Most people leave immediately. The smart ones do, anyway. I never went ice fishing again. I couldn't. Every time I even thought about it, I'd hear Earl's voice begging me to let him in, and I'd remember how close I came to opening that door. How badly I wanted to see him, even though I knew it wasn't really him. Whatever was out there on that ice, it knew exactly how to hurt me. It knew who I missed, who I loved, and it used that against me. That's the thing about the cold and the darkness. They bring things out, things that feed on loneliness and grief and desperate hope. And in winter, when you're isolated and vulnerable, those things come knocking. This last story is the hardest one for me to tell. Not because it was the most frightening, though it was certainly terrifying, but because of what I learned about myself that night, about what we're capable of when survival becomes the only thing that matters. This happened in December of 1994. I was 61 years old, and after what happened on that frozen lake, I had promised myself I would never go winter camping again. But my nephew Daniel had just earned his wilderness survival certification, and he begged me to take him on a winter survival trip. please, just one night," he said. We would build a proper snow shelter, make a fire, do everything by the book. He said he wanted to learn something from my experience. After everything I'd been through, I should have said no. I should have known better. But Daniel was my sister's son, and she had passed away the year before. Breast cancer. Before she died, she asked me to look after him, and I couldn't say no to her. He was, after all, my dear sister's only boy. So I agreed. It was only one night. What could possibly go wrong in one night? We drove to the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, near the Canadian border. Daniel had picked a spot he'd researched thoroughly, a small lake about 2 miles from the nearest road, surrounded by dense forest. The plan was simple. Hike to the lake in the afternoon, build a snow shelter, spend the night, and hike back in the morning. Easy, safe, controlled. The hike to the lake was beautiful. It had snowed the day before, and everything looked pristine. Daniel was in high spirits, talking excitedly about his survival training, the different kinds of shelters we could build, how surprisingly warm a properly constructed snow cave could be. I let him talk. His enthusiasm reminded me of myself at that age, before winter camping had been ruined for me. We reached the lake around 3 in the afternoon. There was still plenty of daylight. Daniel picked a spot near the tree line where the snow had drifted deep enough for us to build a good snow shelter. For those who don't know, a snow shelter is basically a carved-out mound of snow. You pile the snow up, let it sit for a couple of hours, then hollow it out. Done properly, it can actually be warmer than a tent, because snow is such an excellent insulator. We worked together to build a large mound about 25 feet across and 16 feet high. It was hard work, and by the time we finished, we were both sweating despite the cold. Daniel pushed guide sticks, little branches about a foot long, into the mound to show how deep we should carve the walls. Then we waited for the snow to settle and harden. While we waited, we gathered firewood and organized our gear. Daniel was meticulous, double-checking everything. He'd brought all the right equipment, knew all the right procedures. He was prepared. We both were, or so we thought. Around 5 o'clock, we started hollowing out the snow hut. Daniel went in first, carving from the entrance, and I pulled the snow out behind him. After about an hour, we had a proper shelter. The walls were about 3 feet thick, just as we wanted. Inside, there was enough room for both of us to lie down comfortably, and Daniel had even carved a little shelf for our gear. We had poked a stick through the roof to make a ventilation hole. Everything was by the book. By the time we finished, it was completely dark. The temperature was dropping fast. It had probably already hit 0. We built a fire just outside the entrance, melted snow for water, and made dinner. Daniel was proud of what we'd done. And to be honest, so was I. The snow shelter looked solid, professional. He snapped a few photos with a disposable camera, grinning in front of our shelter. We sat by the fire for a while, talking about his mother, about memories of her, good memories, happy ones. It felt good to share them with him, to remember her together. Around 9, we decided to go to bed. We put out the fire, made sure the coals would burn for a few more hours, and crawled into the snow shelter. Daniel had been right about the warmth. Inside our sleeping bags, shielded from the wind and with our body heat trapped by the snow walls, it was actually comfortable. Not warm, exactly, but nowhere near as bitterly cold as it would have been in a tent. Daniel fell asleep almost instantly. I could hear his soft snoring beside me and see the faint glow of the dying fire at the entrance. I don't know what woke me. Maybe instinct. Maybe some sound my conscious mind didn't register, but my subconscious did. But I opened my eyes and immediately knew something was wrong. The fire outside had died. That wasn't right. We'd built it big enough to last for hours, but now there was complete darkness, and the air felt different, thicker somehow, harder to breathe. I reached over to shake Daniel awake. "Daniel," I whispered, "something's wrong." He didn't respond. I shook him harder. "Daniel, wake up!" Still nothing. I felt for his face in the darkness, touched his cheek. It was cold, too cold. Panic shot through me like electricity. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands clumsy in my sleeping bag. When I finally got it on and pointed it at Daniel, my heart stopped. His lips were blue. His face was pale, almost gray. He wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. "Daniel!" I screamed, shaking him violently. "Daniel, wake up!" Nothing. I pressed my ear to his chest. There was a heartbeat, faint and slow, but it was there. He was alive, barely. And then I understood. Carbon monoxide poisoning, or carbon dioxide buildup. The ventilation hole must have gotten blocked. We were suffocating in our own shelter. I dragged him toward the entrance, or at least where I thought the entrance should be. But when I reached the spot, there was nothing there. Just solid snow. The entrance had been blocked, sealed shut. I started digging frantically with my bare hands, clawing at the snow. My flashlight was tucked under my chin, casting wild shadows as I worked. The snow was packed hard, frozen in the few hours since we'd gone to sleep. My fingers were already going numb, but I didn't care. I had to get us out. I had to save Daniel. As I dug, I became aware of a sound outside. Scraping, like something was packing more snow against the entrance, working against me. For every handful I pulled away, more seemed to take its place. It was impossible. We were being buried alive. "Help!" I screamed. "Someone help us!" But who would hear me? We were 2 miles from the nearest road, alone in the wilderness. There was no one to help. It was just me, and I was running out of time. Daniel was dying. Hell, I was dying. My head was already feeling fuzzy, my movements getting sluggish. The lack of oxygen was affecting me too. I thought about my sister, about the promise I'd made to her, about how I'd brought her son out here, and now he was going to die because of me. The guilt was overwhelming, almost worse than the fear. But I couldn't give up. I wouldn't. I remembered the knife on my belt. With shaking hands, I pulled it out and started stabbing at the snow, using the blade to break through the harder layers. It was working slowly. I could feel cold air starting to seep through. Precious oxygen. I dug harder, stabbed faster, ignoring the pain in my frozen hands, the burning in my lungs. Finally, my knife broke through to the outside. I made the hole bigger, gasping as fresh air rushed in. Then I went back for Daniel, grabbed him under the arms, and dragged him toward the opening. He was dead weight, and I'm not a big woman. Getting him through that hole was the hardest physical thing I've ever done in my life. But adrenaline does incredible things. I got him out and dragged him away from the Quingy, away from that death trap. I laid him on his back in the snow and started doing rescue breathing. I'd learned it decades ago, but I'd never had to use it. Please work, I prayed. Please, please work. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute, Daniel gasped. His eyes flew open, confused and terrified. He tried to sit up, but I held him down. Easy, I told him. Just breathe. Just breathe. We sat there in the snow, both of us gasping for air like we'd been underwater. When Daniel could finally speak, the first thing he asked was what happened. I told him about waking up, about the blocked entrance, about the sound of something packing snow against it. He looked at me like I was crazy. "Grandma," he said gently, "snow probably just collapsed and blocked the entrance. It happens sometimes with poorly built quinzees." But I knew what I'd heard. I knew the difference between snow collapsing and something deliberately packing it. I'd heard the scraping, the methodical sound of something working to seal us in. But I didn't argue. Daniel was alive. That was all that mattered. We didn't stay to investigate. We packed our gear as fast as our frozen hands would allow, and we hiked out that night by headlamp. 2 miles through the dark forest. But neither of us suggested staying. We both knew, even if Daniel wouldn't admit it, that something had tried to kill us. When we got back to the car and had the heat blasting, Daniel examined the entrance to our Quingy, using the photos he'd taken earlier. He was trying to figure out what went wrong, where we'd made our mistake. But I knew we hadn't made a mistake. We'd built that shelter perfectly. The ventilation hole had been clear. The entrance had been secure. Something had sealed us in. Something had tried to make sure we never woke up. Daniel never went winter camping again after that night. He got a job in Florida, as far from snow and ice as he could get. We don't talk about what happened, but sometimes, on the phone, I can hear it in his voice. The fear, the knowledge that we came within minutes of dying out there. People ask me why I'm telling these stories now, after keeping them secret for so long. I'm 91 years old. I've lived a long life, and I've seen things I can't explain. Things that don't fit into the neat little boxes we like to put the world into. And I think people need to know that winter isn't just cold weather and pretty snow. There's something else out there. Something old. Something hungry. It waits in the silence. It watches from the darkness. And when you're alone and vulnerable in the deep cold of winter, it comes for you. Maybe it's the spirits of those who died from the cold, still seeking warmth they'll never find. Maybe it's something else entirely. I don't know. I don't pretend to understand it. But I know this. If you ever go winter camping, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If you hear footsteps circling your tent, don't investigate. If voices call your name from the darkness, don't answer. And if someone or something tries to seal you in your shelter, fight like hell to get out. Because winter takes no prisoners, and whatever lives in that cold, dark wilderness, it's patient. It's been there longer than any of us, and it will be there long after we're gone. Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the warmest shelter can become the coldest grave. If this ending stayed with you, tap like and subscribe button so I know you made it to the end.